Good morning. It is Tuesday, April 7th. I'm Maeve McMahon and you're watching Europe Today, your daily dose of European news and analysis, live here on Euronews. Coming up just days before Hungary's parliamentary elections, US Vice President JD Vance is due in Budapest today. Vance will attend a campaign rally and hold a joint press conference with Prime Minister Viktor Orbán. We'll be bringing you the latest from our reporter on the ground. Meanwhile, Viktor Orbán has held emergency talks after explosives were reportedly found near a pipeline carrying Russian gas to Hungary. The development comes as his party trails behind in opinion polls ahead of this weekend's vote. But first, EU Council President Antonio Costa has said targeting civilian infrastructure would be illegal and unacceptable. His comments follow escalating tensions after US President Donald Trump threatens strikes on Iranian infrastructure if the Strait of Hormuz is not reopened. Speaking on Truth Social, Donald Trump used foul language, saying Tuesday will be Power Plant Day and Bridge Day, all wrapped up in one in Iran. There'll be nothing like it. Open the strait, or you'll be living in hell. For the latest, we can now cross over to Doha, where your news correspondent Adel Halim is standing by for us this morning. Good morning, Adel. Thanks so much for joining us. Look, this Trump deadline is approaching very fast, but what exactly should we read into here?
Yeah, Maeve, the clock is really ticking now. We're less than 18 hours away from that 8 p.m. Washington deadline imposed by U.S. President Donald Trump for Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, a vital shipping route that Tehran says is open but closed to its enemies. Over the Easter weekend, the rhetoric really ramped up. Trump warned Iran would be, quote, living in hell if a deal was not reached. Now, Tehran hit back just as strongly. Speaking to the Associated Press, Iran's culture minister called the U.S. president unstable and delusional, saying his statements aren't taken seriously. There was a diplomatic off-ramp where a potential 45-day ceasefire proposal from Pakistan, Egypt, and Turkey, but Iran's foreign minister rejected it outright, calling it illogical. Now, in a lengthy press conference on Monday, President Trump laid out in very stark terms what could happen if Iran doesn't comply. Take a listen.
They have a period of, till tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I gave them an extension. They asked for an extension of 7 days, right? I can tell you they're negotiating, we think, in good faith. We're giving them till tomorrow, 8 o'clock Eastern time. And after that, they're going to have no bridges. They're going to have no power plants. Stone Ages, yeah.
President Donald Trump there. And beyond his various statements, of course, the South Pars natural gas field has been hit again, and Gulf countries are also still being targeted, Adele.
That's right. It's adding real anxiety to the region. Iran's South Pars petrochemical complex is a critical site, part of the world's largest natural gas reserve, shared with Qatar, and it's the second time it's been targeted in a few weeks. But there are also signs of diplomacy. Qatar's Prime Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman bin Thani received a phone call from Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi yesterday. And speaking to our Euronews colleagues in Dubai, the diplomatic advisor to UAE's president says a ceasefire is not enough and is calling for a durable security plan. But with the conflict now in its sixth week, Maeve, and that deadline just hours away, the situation remains extremely tense.
OK, Adel Halim, thank you so much for that live update there from Doha. Now back here in Europe, the clock is ticking towards the biggest election of the year for the European Union, taking place this very Sunday in Hungary. Just a few days ahead of the big day, though, Serbia said they found explosives at the Hungarian border, very close to a pipeline, delivering Russian gas to Hungary. The case evolved fast into a campaign topic in Hungary, with the government pointing fingers at Ukraine and the opposition calling it a false flag operation. Our Hungarian correspondent, Chandler Ziros, is here with me this morning in the studio to tell us exactly what is going on. Fill us in.
Good morning, Maeve. Yes, indeed. Sunday morning, the Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić announced that 2 bags of explosives were found close to the border with Hungary next to the pipeline which is called Turkish Stream. This is a pipeline delivering Russian natural gas to Hungary and to Serbia, and this is a major component of Hungary's energy supplies. Now, Viktor Orbán immediately called for a Security College meeting, and then he ordered soldiers to guard the pipeline in Hungary, and he also started to point fingers at Ukraine. Let's listen to what he said.
Ukrajna pedig évek óta azon dolgozik, hogy Európát elvágja.
Ukraine has been working for years to cut Europe off from Russian energy. They blew up Nord Stream, shut down the gas pipeline supplying Hungary, and this year, by closing the Friendship pipeline, they placed Hungary under an oil blockade, while the Russian section of the Turk Stream is under continuous military attack. Ukraine's effort pose a direct threat to Hungary.
Ukrajna törekvése Magyarország számára életveszélyt jelent.
Viktor Orbán there. And Chandra, how is this issue even related to the elections, and how are Hungarians perceiving the claims of Viktor Orbán?
Well, in fact, you saw what Orbán said. He's accusing Ukraine. This is nothing new. Hungary campaigns against Ukraine since many, many months. By the way, Ukraine rejected those allegations. Now, very interesting that the opposition is talking about a false flag operation. Péter Magyar said that Orbán is using this issue in order to hijack public opinion and to postpone or cancel the elections. Now I have to quote what Péter Magyar said. Many people suggested that something might accidentally happen in Serbia, possibly involving a gas pipeline 1 week before the Hungarian elections. I want to make it clear that Viktor Orbán will not be able to prevent next Sunday's election, Péter Magyar said. In addition to this, two security experts last week already said publicly that something is in the making, a possible false flag operation, and one of these experts explicitly mentioned that it could happen in Serbia. By the way, Serbia is saying that mentioning Ukraine is a disinformation. They are investigating an illegal migrant who might be involved in this attempt.
Okay, Chandra Ziros, thank you so much for all those details on what will be a very busy week for you. And meanwhile, the Trump administration is pulling out all the stops to support its preferred candidate in these elections. The US Vice President J.D. Vance will be spending the next 2 days on the campaign trail with Viktor Orbán to, quote, celebrate the deep ties between the two countries. For more on this relationship between President Trump and Viktor Orbán, here's Euronews' correspondent Zoltán Zibozsegi from Budapest.
Today, US Vice President J.D. Vance is arriving in Budapest for an official visit. But it's hard to tell whether this is really a diplomatic event or more of a campaign stop. Hungary is heading into parliamentary election this Sunday. And for the first time in 16 years, polls shows Viktor Orbán could lose his position as a prime minister. In these final days, he is doing everything he can to turn the result around. In recent years, Hungary's government has become increasingly isolated within the EU because its anti-Ukraine stance and Eurosceptic billboard campaigns. Orbán is now trying to show that he is not alone, that he still has strong allies. He often points to his good relationship with powerful leaders all around the world, from Israel to Russia. But his most important ally is clearly Donald Trump. Viktor Orbán praised Donald Trump's national security strategy as the most important and interesting document of recent years, saying it finally recognizes the civilizational crisis Europe faces. For months, Orbán's party, Fidesz, tried to organize a Hungarian visit for US president in the campaign to publicly show his support with the sovereignists. But with all the ongoing international conflicts, Trump hasn't made the trip. There were rumors for a while that Vice President Vance will come instead, for example on CPEC conference, but it never happened. The fact that J.D. Vance is now visiting Hungary just 5 days before the election sends a clear message. In Washington, and especially around Trump's circle in Mar-a-Lago, there's a strong preference for Orbán to win a fifth term. In earlier speeches, Vance has even described Orbán as a kind of defender of conservative Christian Europe. They will meet this afternoon, but the big question is now whether that kind of support will be enough to help Fidesz close the roughly 20-point gap they are facing in the polls.
Zoltán Zibozsegi there reporting for us on J.D. Vance's trip to Budapest today, which will bring the whole city to a standstill. And this trip, of course, is being closely monitored here in Brussels, especially given J.D. Vance's speech last year at the Munich Security Conference, where he upset a lot of Europeans. For more, we can bring in now Euronews' EU editor, Maria Tadeo. Good morning. Good morning. So Brussels watching this very closely.
Well, watching this very closely, and the election itself, of course, when you talk to any diplomat in Brussels and also around the capitals, will tell you the Hungarian election is the election to watch this year. It's the most important, the most consequential, and obviously on Sunday, everyone in this town is going to be monitoring those results. that the U.S. is really now throwing support behind Orbán, and yet the approach from the European Union has been the complete opposite, to really do low profile, to not get involved, to not respond, to really not snap back. And you saw in those pictures that when you walk around Budapest, the face of Ursula von der Leyen is in posters which sort of portray this as a head of the Commission that is going to destroy Europe, and Viktor Orbán is the polar opposite, the man who is going to face her. And still, we've seen very little from the Commission. We also know and have reported this extensively on Euronews that for months now, the Commission has put everything on hold. Major decisions on Hungary, obviously legal procedures are still pending, all of this frozen, not to be used in the election. The one thing, however, that Brussels has been keen on not doing, and is obviously keeping this as the ace, really the leverage that they have over the Hungarians, really truly is the money. Obviously, we've talked about billions of euros that have been frozen. Hungary also applied for a loan to spend money, cash, into weapons, around 17 billion euros. That has been frozen. It's the only country to not have its defense plan approved, and this idea that nothing will move until the election happens. The other point also we should note is that when it comes to the relationship now between Brussels and Budapest, I was there the last time for the election. Obviously, there's been tensions now playing out for years, but this time what really changes is there's a very strong security aspect. Obviously, this is not just about an ideological clash, about the politics, but really now for a number of member states, Hungary now so close to Russia, the tapes, the leaks, the conversations among the foreign ministers of the two countries, that has now really crossed the line, because now you talk about defense and key security capabilities, and that is now seen really as a red line. The one thing I would note just very briefly also is when you talk to diplomats in Brussels, they tell you whichever way this goes, the relationship will have to change. If Magyar wins, obviously that's a new government. If Orbán wins, he could lose a lot of seats, and obviously that could translate into perhaps a weaker Orbán. So whatever happens on Sunday, something will have to change.
And just briefly, you mentioned Peter Magyar. How does Brussels view him?
You know, it's an interesting one, because in a way, they have kept a very calculated distance. Brussels doesn't comment about Peter Magyar. They've also been low profile on that. He obviously does not want to get involved in Brussels, and we've not seen him really in the European institutions, because back in Budapest, one of the attack lines from the Orbán government is to say, ultimately, this guy, look, he's just a puppet of Ursula von der Leyen and the political establishment. What is interesting, however, there's been a number of moves that have been seen in Brussels. One is the fact that he says he wants to unlock the cash. If you want to unlock the funding, then it means obviously something is going to have to change in terms of rule of law. The fact that he went to Munich Security Conference, that was also perceived as, look, this could be a Hungary within NATO now that becomes less problematic. And then third, you know, his foreign policy and his advisors around it, they are seen as perhaps more moderate and more pro-European. But as I say, it's both an opportunity, but also an enigma, and a lot of distance for the time being.
OK, we'll keep a close eye on it. And you'll, of course, be in Hungary for that very important election. So do stay tuned to Euronews for that, and keep an eye on euronews.com for more analysis. Now, moving on, as the war in Ukraine and the conflicts in the Middle East drag on, this April marks 3 years since Sudan's civil war broke out, when a power struggle began between two branches of its armed forces. For the view from the ground, we spoke to Kristin Davis, the UNHCR ambassador, and the American actress best known for her role as Charlotte in Sex and the City. She recently visited the East African country. With millions on the move and a conflict at risk of spreading, Kristin Davis started by telling us not to forget about one of the bloodiest conflicts in recent years.
For some reason, media does not seem to want to cover it, which I find really interesting, and I can't explain why, but I do know that I work with UNHCR. I'm a Goodwill ambassador, and I knew that the war was ongoing and that many, many people have been displaced. 12 million people have been displaced, which is a stunning number, especially because it isn't even something that's being reported on. So we just went a few weeks back. I went to South Sudan because I wanted to see for myself what was happening. Every time that I have gone on a trip to a refugee camp or a refugee area where people are crossing from conflict, like really life or death level conflict, it's always upsetting, but at the same time it's also inspiring because the people are so strong. And in this situation, it's largely women and children, and a lot of very, very young children. And they've had to travel far distances with very, very dangerous situations. So when they cross the border, they're relieved, but they're also, you know, stressed. They don't know where they're going to go. They don't know what they're going to do. They need to find a safe place for their children, just like you or I would feel. Obviously, they did nothing wrong to make them be a refugee. They're just trying to keep their family alive. And many of them told me stories of their husbands being taken out of the house and shot in front of them.
And do they feel alone? Do they feel like the international community has forgotten about them?
I don't think so, no. I don't think so, because UNHCR is there. We're there. That is our mandate, to be there for refugees, for people who are displaced. And we will do everything in our power to be there and to give them life-saving aid right away in an emergency. Now, there have been funding cuts, which is pretty upsetting. I could tell that was your next question. This was the first trip that I had made since the funding cuts. So that was upsetting and depressing also, because I've never been in a situation where we were not able to give them a hot meal when they have originally arrived to the camps. That was kind of upsetting. We had the high-protein biscuits that we were giving to children 5 and under and to pregnant women. But I haven't ever been in a situation where we couldn't say, here's your water, here's your tent, here's your hot meal. It was just really so deeply troubling after everything that they've been through, after the violence that they've been through, that we can't feed them a hot meal.
But what is the future for these people? You described millions of people on the move, millions of people displaced. Where will these people go? Obviously, I'm sure they just want to go home.
They do want to go home. And I mean, one can only hope that some larger forces will intervene that will bring peace, or at least encourage the players to put down their arms and stop the fighting. The region has obviously been through, many struggles in the past, which I feel like in some ways influences the fact that people aren't talking about it in the media. I think there's some level of fatigue, which is unfortunate because it's still people's lives. Every single country there, and they're very poor countries, but every single country is making a huge effort to accommodate the people and give them the services that they can give them. They're very poor countries again, so you don't think about necessarily that that's where refugees are, but largely that, I think 70% of refugees are in really poor countries and then never make it to Europe or the United States. Most people, I think, have the misperception that people are just coming freely. That's so not the case. I think it's 1% get resettled. So they're mostly in the poor neighboring countries who can be very, very welcoming, which is hugely important. They may not have a huge amount of funding for them, but the warmth of the welcome is powerful. I think they just want to go home at this point, and it's so many people that it's hard to even imagine, how they will be resettled into these new countries that they're in. But I do think everyone's making a huge effort for that to be a positive experience for them.
And meanwhile, Kristin, the war, the US-Israel war on Iran, it's entering its second month. It's turned the whole world upside down.
Yeah.
Could we be in this for the long haul, you think?
I hope not. I really hope not. It's obviously so deeply, deeply upsetting. And I was just talking to my UNHCR colleagues, and over 1 million people have been displaced in Lebanon already. And it's just begun. So it's deeply, deeply disturbing. And I hope that people can, find a way to de-escalate. I mean, this is what we always hope for. No one wants war.
And what would your final message of hope be to our viewers who are tuning in today, feeling very overwhelmed and stressed about the state of the world?
The world is chaotic right now. I fully get that. But I feel that in terms of refugees and displaced people, empathy is more powerful in some ways even than funds, like understanding that they did not cause this, that the people who are displaced are not at fault. Nothing they did wrong happened that made them be displaced, right? Just having that empathy. And all of us know someone who's a refugee or the child of a refugee. There's people around you that you may not even realize are refugees. And having some understanding of what they've been through, being able to maybe just say a kind word to them. There's so many tiny things you can do that improve the world and that also make you feel better. I find that for myself, it's a way for you to feel like, okay, I can make a positive difference in my little world right now. And that's something.
Okay, Kristin Davis, thank you so much for speaking to us here on Your Own. So lovely to have you with us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Kristin Davis there, the American actress and the UNHCR Goodwill Ambassador, speaking to me earlier. Well, that brings this edition of Europe Today to an end. Thank you so much for tuning in, as always. For more news and analysis, do visit yournews.com. Take care and see you very soon.